The woman at the gate was alone. I had been watching from the parapet for 3 minutes before I came down, long enough to see she wasn't a threat, long enough to see she wasn't a supplicant either. She stood in the snow without fidgeting, one hand inside her cloak, and she did not look up at the walls the way most people did when they came to Ashcroft Hold. Most people looked up because they wanted to gauge the weight of the place pressing down on them. She looked at the gate itself, as if it were a question she was deciding whether to ask. My gate captain, Pell, had already told her twice to state her business. I heard him as I came down the outer steps, his voice carrying the particular flatness he used for people he'd already decided weren't worth the gate's motion. "One more time," he said as I reached the bottom. "Name and pack." "Senna," she said. "No pack." Pell looked at me, then back at her. He was going to send her away. That was the correct decision. We didn't take in strays at Ashcroft Hold, and a packless woman in the outer north in late winter was either running from something or looking for something we wouldn't want to give her. I had made this policy myself, 2 years after I took the seat, when the third packless man I'd fed through the winter had stolen 4 of my wolves' tack and 3 months of grain stores on his way south in the spring. I was about to nod to Pell when she moved her hand. She'd had it pressed to her chest, inside the cloak, and when she drew it out she was holding a wolf pup, or what had once been a wolf pup before something had gotten to it. It was wrapped in a strip of leather, the kind you'd use for a bootlace, with a second strip around its midsection like a harness, tucked against her body for warmth. Its eyes were closed. Its breathing was shallow, and around its left ear, threaded through the soft fur at the tip, was a braid of red cord. My wolves used red cord. No one else in the outer north used red cord. It was an Ashcroft Hold marking, 3 generations of it, and I had put it on the ears of every pup born in my pens for 11 years. I crossed the snow in 8 steps. She held the pup up to me without being asked, without stepping back. Most people stepped back when I moved toward them that quickly. She watched my face and waited. "Where did you find it?" I said. "South bank of the Voreth, 2 miles east of the timber crossing," she said. "4 days ago. There was a den site, looked like the pack had moved on fast. He was the last one there. He wasn't going to last another night." The Voreth South Bank was 11 miles from Ashcroft Hold. My lead wolf, Mara, had whelped 9 pups 8 weeks ago. One had gone missing in the 3rd week, a runt, smaller than the rest, who had somehow gotten past the Undercroft gate. We'd searched 3 days. The gate master had told me very quietly that a pup that small and that young wouldn't survive a winter night outside the hold. I had agreed with him. I had not searched a 4th day. I took the pup from her. It was light, too light, and the leather harness around it was the woman's own work, stitched through with a needle and gut thread. She had made it herself. She had carried this pup 4 days through the outer north, in late winter, in the snow, pressed against her body for warmth, with no reason I could name to do so. "It's Mara's," I said. "I thought it might be someone's," she said. "The cord." I handed the pup to Pell and told him to take it to the Undercroft immediately, to send for the hold's keeper, and to tell Mara. Then I looked at the woman again. She was younger than I'd first thought, somewhere in the space between a girl and a woman fully settled into herself, standing exactly at that line. Her cloak was good quality, old but well kept. Her boots were pack-made, a southern pack stitching. She had a pack once then. She'd been traveling long enough for the cloak to get old. She was not afraid of me, which I noticed because most people were, and the ones who weren't afraid were usually the ones I needed to watch most carefully. "Where are you going?" I said. "North," she said. "There's nothing north of here but the Veldrath Range." "I know." I looked at her a moment longer, then I said, "One night. You can sleep in the east wing with the other travelers. There's a meal at 6th bell. You'll be on the road again at first light." She looked at me the way she'd looked at the gate, as if she were deciding whether to say something. "Thank you," she said, and didn't say the other thing. Marva knew. I went to the Undercroft an hour after the woman arrived, after I'd handled the afternoon's business. A border dispute from the eastern holds. A request for winter grain from 2 pack leaders to the south, the usual weight of keeping a kingdom running through a season that didn't particularly care whether the kingdom survived it. By the time I reached the pens, Mara had the pup between her front paws, cleaning it with the slow, methodical attention she gave to things she intended to keep. The hold keeper, a stout woman named Dara who'd managed the wolf pens since before I was born, watched me come in. "He'll live," she said. "Borderline, but he'll live." She kept him warm enough. Fed him on dried meat broth. She'd cooked it in her travel tin and squeezed it out through a strip of cloth, small amounts, regular intervals. 4 days of it. She shook her head. That pup would have been dead by the first morning. She kept him alive through application of pure, stubborn will, is what I think. I looked at Mara. Mara looked back at me. She was my oldest wolf, 11 years in my service, which made her ancient by the reckoning of the northern packs, who expected their lead animals to be put down by 6 or 7 when they began to slow. I had never put Mara down. She had never slowed. She was gray at the muzzle now, and she didn't move as fast as she once had, but she was still the one the pack followed, still the one whose opinion mattered when I made decisions about the wolves, which direction to send them, which ones were ready, which needed more time. I had trusted Mara's judgment more times than I could count. Mara had also, in 11 years, refused every woman my council brought to the hold for presenting. 3 times in the early years, when my council still believed they could arrange my bond through the traditional means, they had brought suitable candidates to the Undercroft and asked Mara to assess them. She had assessed them with a kind of calm, complete indifference that communicated very clearly that she was not interested in the council's opinion of what was suitable. The candidates had left. The council had eventually stopped suggesting it. Now Mara was cleaning the runt with her enormous gray head bent over him, and she did not look up at me again. I went back upstairs. At 6th bell I took my meal in the hall with the council, which I generally did when there was nothing pressing enough to eat in my study. The East Wing travelers, 7 of them tonight, a trading family from the central holds and 2 wandering bond workers, sat at the far end of the long table. The packless woman, Senna, sat at the end of the bench nearest the fire. She ate without looking at the rest of the table, not in the way of someone who felt out of place, more in the way of someone who had learned that looking at the rest of the table generally produced conversations they didn't want. She had changed into a dry shirt under the cloak, and she'd put her hair back in a practical knot, and she ate the hold's winter stew with the deliberate attention of someone who knew better than to waste food. My council second, Vane, leaned toward me. "The packless woman," he said low, "she has no bond marks." "None." I noticed. "She's been traveling for years, by the look of her." Also noticed. A woman without a pack and without a bond mark, traveling alone through the outer north in winter, is either extremely capable or extremely desperate, Vane said. "Or both," I said. Vane was quiet for a moment. "She brought the pup back," he said. "It was not quite a question." "She did." "No reason to," he said. "No." Vane looked at his stew. He was 50 years old and had been my council second for 9 of my 11 years on the seat, and he was a man who paid more attention to the things people did without reason than to the things they did with reasons carefully prepared in advance. I had hired him partly for this quality. "First light," he said finally. "First light," I agreed. I looked down the table at her once more. She was not looking at me. She was watching the fire with the expression of someone whose thoughts had gone somewhere else entirely. At 3 bells past midnight, Dara woke me. She did not knock gently. Dara never knocked gently. She rapped on the study door with her knuckles in the particular rhythm that meant something had happened in the pens, and I was on my feet before the second knock finished. "The 3 from the East Pen," she said when I opened the door. "They've broken the latch. It's the 3rd time this winter that latch has needed replacing since autumn, and I've told the gate master 3 times and—" Where are they now? I said. Dara looked at me. That's the thing, she said. They were outside the east wing. All three of them, Kale, the big gray male, and his two sisters, Rena and Pole, the brindle pair who hunted together and generally treated each other as their only relevant social unit. They had broken the pen latch, made their way up through the hold's lower passages, climbed the east stair, which required passing through two doors, both of which they had evidently simply pushed open, and arranged themselves in the corridor outside the east wing sleeping chambers. Specifically, outside the door at the far end of the corridor. Kale was lying across the threshold. Rena and Pole were on either side of it. All three were awake, alert, and entirely calm. I stood in the corridor and looked at them. Which room is that? I said to Dara. Dara's expression communicated several things at once, none of them comfortable. The packless woman, she said. I put her at the end, it's the quietest one. Kale looked up at me. His tail moved once, a single, considered sweep, and then he put his head back down on his paws. I stood there in the corridor for a long moment. These were not young wolves. Kale was 7, which in northern reckoning made him a senior animal. Rena and Pole were 5. They had never, in all the time I'd had them, shown particular interest in any person outside the pack hierarchy. They slept in the pens. They did not break latches and climb stairs and arrange themselves outside strangers' doors at 3 in the morning. That was not a thing my wolves did. Fix the latch in the morning, I told Dara. And the wolves? I looked at Kale again. He had closed his eyes. Leave them, I said. I went back to my study and did not sleep for the remainder of the night. In the morning, she was moving through the east wing corridor with all three of them at her heels. Not following her precisely, that implies a more deliberate choice than it looked. It was more that they were simply where she was. Kale walked at her left shoulder. Rena and Pole moved in easy orbit, 2 or 3 steps off, the way they moved when they were working together without being told. Senna herself was not calling to them or gesturing at them. She was walking to the washroom with a folded cloth over one arm, and the 3 wolves were simply occurring in her vicinity, as if this were an arrangement everyone had agreed to. I was coming down the east stair when I saw it. I stopped. She looked up and saw me stopped. For a moment, neither of us said anything. They were outside my door, she said. I didn't call them. I don't know how they got there. I know how they got there, I said. They broke the pen latch. She looked at Kale. Kale looked back at her with the absolute, steadfast calm of an animal who has made a decision and sees no reason to revisit it. I'm sorry, she said. I'm not doing anything. I've never been around wolves much. My pack didn't keep them. Which pack? A small pause. Venholt, she said. I left 4 years ago. Venholt was a southern pack, river traders, 300 members. I knew the name. I did not know why a woman from Venholt would be traveling north alone through the outer north in the middle of winter, and I did not ask, because it was not my question to ask yet. Breakfast is at first bell, I said. After breakfast, come to the east gate. We'll sort your traveling provision and see you on your way. Thank you, she said again. She turned toward the washroom. Kale fell into step behind her. Rena and Pole drifted after him. I watched them go. I had intended to sort the provision quickly. A traveling pack, 2 days of food, a small stipend, the standard we gave to anyone who came to Ashcroft Hold in good faith. It would take 15 minutes and then she would be gone, and I could stop standing in corridors at 3 in the morning, watching my wolves rearrange themselves around a woman I had no reason to keep. But my council had asked to assemble that morning. There was a land matter from the western edge that had grown complicated over winter, and 2 of the eastern pack leaders had sent word that they would be passing through Ashcroft Hold in the next week and wished to discuss treaty terms. Council matters, the ordinary weight of rule. I had told them 9th bell, and 9th bell was when I needed to be in the hall, and it was already 7th bell by the time I thought to send for Senna. So I sent Pell to find her and tell her the East Gate provision would be in the hall, after council's first morning session, and she should wait. I did not expect to find her in the hall when I arrived. She was sitting at the far end of the long table, the same place she'd sat for supper, in the way she had of occupying a room's least significant corner. She had her traveling pack at her feet. She was not looking at anything in particular. Cale was under the table. Rena and Pole were on either side of her bench. I stopped in the doorway. Vane appeared at my elbow. "The wolves followed her from the east wing," he said low. "Dara tried to call them back. They declined." I looked at the hall. My council was filing in, 6 men and 2 women, the people I trusted to help me hold this territory together, all of them taking their seats at the table and looking at the wolves around the packless woman with varying degrees of expression. "Keaton," Vane said, and his voice had a quality I recognized. The quality of someone who is about to say the thing they've been turning over for several hours. "I know," I said. "Do you?" "Vane." He was quiet. I walked to the table and took my seat at the head of it and looked at my counsel. Senna, at the far end, looked at me, and I nodded at her she could stay. It was faster than sending her out, and she accepted this with the equanimity of someone who had learned to wait without difficulty. We worked through the land matter. We discussed the Eastern Pack leaders and what they likely wanted from the treaty discussion. We went through 2 reports from the Border Watch. It was an hour of ordinary administration, and I paid attention to it, and I was aware the entire time that Mara was not in the hall. Mara did not generally come to the hall. She was a wolf, not a court official. She had her territory, the Undercroft, the pens, the lower passages, and she understood its limits. In 11 years she had come to the hall 3 times. Once when a traveling wolf from a rival pack had gotten past the gate and needed her presence to settle it without bloodshed. Once when I had been sick enough that Dara had stopped coming and sent her instead. And once in the first year, when she was still learning what the hold was, and she had wanted to see all of it. I was in the middle of a border assessment when I heard her nails on the stone. She came in from the south passage, which connected the lower hold to the great hall, and she moved without hurrying. Her gray head was up. Her ears were forward. She did not look at me. She walked the length of the hall. My counsel went quiet, one by one as she passed them. She stopped at the far end of the table, and she lay down at Senna's feet. Not beside her, not near her, at her feet, in the way of a wolf who has chosen a place and intends it to be understood as a choice. Senna looked down at her. Then she looked at me, with the expression of someone who genuinely does not know what to do with what is happening. For a moment the hall was entirely silent. Then Cale crawled out from under the table and settled his chin on Senna's boot. Rena and Pole were already there. I counted slowly in my head, 4 wolves in my hall. Arranged around a packless woman from Venholt who had brought back a runt pup she found in a snow-covered den site on the south bank of the Vorith River, and who claimed she did not know why this kept happening, and whom I had last night resolved to put on the road this morning. Vane had stopped looking at the border reports. Councillor Dimeth, who was 70 years old and had served my father before me, was looking at Mara with an expression I had not seen on his face before, which was something like awe. "Keaton," he said, and then stopped. "I'm aware," I said. "Mara has not." "I am aware, Dimeth." He stopped. The hall stayed quiet. I looked at Senna. She was sitting very still, her hands flat on the table, looking at Mara with an expression I was trying to read. It was not the expression of someone who had planned this, or staged it, or wanted it for any advantage. It was the expression of someone sitting at the center of something they did not understand and were trying, very quietly, not to flinch from. "Senna," I said. She looked up. "Stay," I said. "For now, we'll talk after council." She nodded once. She did not look relieved or triumphant. She looked as if she were still figuring out what this morning had decided. I, too, was figuring that out. Council ended at 11th bell. I sent everyone out and stayed in the hall, and I heard Senna's bench move, and then she was at the other end of the table, standing, Mara at her side. I looked at the wolf first. "Mara," I said. Mara looked at me, without any particular guilt. "She has her own opinions," Dara said from the doorway. She had stayed, because Dara always stayed when something was happening with the wolves. It was her right and I had never argued it. Always has had. You know that. "I know that," I said. I looked at Senna. She was watching me with the same quality she'd had at the gate, waiting to see what I would decide without pushing it. "Tell me about Venholt," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone deciding what to conceal, the quiet of someone deciding where to start. "I was bonded," she said. "For 2 years. He chose another woman during the pack's mating season. It's permitted in Venholt. A bond can be dissolved if it isn't consecrated. Ours wasn't, so it was dissolved." "And you left." "I left," she said. "There wasn't much to stay for after that." 4 years, I said. 4 years. I had known packless people in my life, men and women both, wanderers and rogues, and some who'd been cast out, and some who'd simply chosen to go. Most of them had a certain quality of fraying about them, as if being without a pack were a wound that couldn't close properly. She did not have that quality. She had something else instead, a self-containment that was not coldness, a kind of stillness that seemed to come from the inside rather than being built against the outside. "What do you want in the north?" I said. "Nothing specific," she said. "I've been moving north for 2 years. I wanted somewhere different from where I'd been." A short pause. "I didn't have a destination." "You still don't." "I still don't," she agreed. I looked at Mara again. Mara was watching me with the expression she used when she had an opinion and was waiting for me to catch up to it. I had seen this expression many times in 11 years. It generally meant I was about to do something she had already decided was correct. "There are roles in the hold," I said. "We're short through winter. The hold keeper can use a second, and Dara," I glanced at Dara. She gave me a short nod that communicated she had been waiting for me to arrive at this for approximately the last hour. "Dara can use someone in the pens, if you want them." Senna looked at me. Something in her expression shifted, not surprise exactly. More like the recalibration of someone who had stopped expecting things and was relearning how to expect them. "I'd take them," she said. "You'd be hold-bound through the winter," I said. "In spring you can go north if you want to." "All right," she said. "And we'd need to know more about Venholt," I said. "If you're staying here, I need to know there's nothing following you." She looked at me for a moment and then said, with a directness that I recognized as its own kind of answer, "There isn't. I left quietly. No one there has thought about me in 4 years." I believed her. I did not entirely know why I believed her, but I had learned to pay attention to the quality of directness in people's voices, and hers had no bend in it. "Then you're hold-bound," I said. "For the winter." She looked down at Mara. Mara looked back up at her. "What is her name?" Senna said. "Mara," I said. Senna said it once quietly, trying it. Mara's tail moved, not the single sweep she'd given me in the corridor, but a fuller motion, 2 or 3 passes, the kind she used with the pups. I watched this happen and felt something shift in my chest. Not the bond. I did not know then that it was the bond. I thought it was simply the thing that happened when you watched your oldest wolf, your most careful wolf, your wolf who had made you earn every small piece of trust for 11 years, put her whole warm attention on a stranger and find her not a stranger. I thought it was just that. She was in the pens by the next morning. I went down at dawn, my habit, and she was already there. She'd risen before the hold bell, which put her ahead of Dara, who rose before everyone and considered this her personal prerogative. She was in the pen with Mara's litter, the surviving 8, kneeling in the straw with her hands quiet in her lap, letting the pups do what pups did, which was investigate everything. The runt, who Dara had taken to calling small, with the straightforward naming logic of someone who had no patience for sentiment, was in her lap, eating. She did not talk to them. She did not gesture at them or try to direct them. She was simply in the pen, available, and the pups were treating this as an invitation. Mara was watching from the pen gate, with the expression of someone whose plan is proceeding. I stood in the Undercroft doorway and did not go in. I told myself I was checking on the runt. That was true. I also told myself I was not standing in the doorway because watching her in the pen with the pups produced a very specific quality of feeling that I did not yet have words for. That was also true and less comfortable. I had been alone for 11 years on the seat. Not lonely, I had Vane and Dara and the council, the whole staff, the work of ruling a northern territory, which was not work that left much room for loneliness even if you were inclined toward it. But alone. I had not looked for a bond partner since the early years when my council had arranged the wolf assessments. After the third candidate left, I had quietly decided that if it came, it would come, and if it did not, I would manage without it, and either way I would not spend my life reaching for something the bond either made undeniable or didn't. I had believed for 11 years that I knew what undeniable would feel like. I had thought it would be sudden, obvious. The bond was supposed to arrive like a mark burning to life, like a wall coming down. That was the old language, the traditional reckoning, the moment of recognition, definite and dramatic and impossible to misread. What was happening with this woman was not dramatic. It was building in increments so small I had almost missed them. The moment at the gate when she had drawn the pup out and I had crossed the snow in 8 steps, the corridor at 3 in the morning, Kale's tail moving once, Mara walking the length of the hall, each one small enough to explain away, each one harder to explain away than the last. I went back upstairs without going into the pen. It was Vane who said it first. He said it on the 4th day, in my study. In the straightforward way, he said things he'd been sitting with for some time. The bond, he said. I looked up from the border reports. I'm saying it plainly because that's what I do, he said. Mara hasn't acted like that for a person in 11 years. Kale and the others don't break latches and climb 3 flights to sleep in front of a stranger's door. The council watched her come in this morning with 17 wolves at her back, not following her, just occurring around her, and Dimeth said something to me that I think you should hear. What did Dimeth say? He said he'd never seen that in 50 years of serving this hold, and he said, Vane paused briefly, he said it was the old sign, the one the Vorith records describe, when the pack's wolves choose before the alpha can, when they name the mate the bond has already settled on before anyone admits it. I was quiet. The Vorith records are 300 years old, I said. They are, Vane said. They're also apparently accurate. I put down the border reports. She doesn't know, I said. I don't think she does, Vane said. She's been packless for 4 years. She may not know the old signs. She may not know what it looks like when wolves act the way these wolves are acting. A pause. Do you? I did. I had read the Vorith records myself, years ago. They were the Hold's oldest documents, kept in the lower archive, and I had gone through them in the first year on the seat in the way. A man went through everything available to him when he was trying to understand what he had inherited. The description was specific. The pack's senior wolves would choose the alpha's mate before the bond was acknowledged, not through any dramatic act of magic, but through the ordinary, undeniable language of animal trust. They would arrange themselves around her. They would not be called to do it. They would simply do it because they knew before the alpha was willing to know, and their loyalty was to the bond, not to his doubt. I had read it as history. I had not read it as instruction. 4 days, I said, we don't know her. You know she carried a dying pup 11 miles in the middle of winter because she found it in a snow-covered den site and couldn't leave it, Vane said. You know she's been traveling for 4 years without becoming either bitter or desperate. You know your wolves, all 17 of them at last count, seem to consider her existing in this hold a resolved matter. He looked at me. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what I see. He gathered his reports and left. I sat in my study for a long time. I went to the pens that evening. She was with Small, the runt, who was eating properly now, who had gone from a limp weight in a leather harness to a small, furious, persistent creature who objected loudly to being put down. She was feeding him from a cloth dipped in the keeper's milk mixture, and she was talking to him in a very low voice that I could not hear from the doorway. Mara was behind her, chin on Senna's shoulder. Mara had taken to this. She had, apparently, decided that the appropriate distance between herself and this woman was no distance at all. I came in. Senna looked up. The low voice stopped. He's eating, she said. It was not a question. She said it with satisfaction, the satisfaction of someone who has done difficult work and watched it hold. Good, I said. I came and sat on the pen's low bench, the one Dara used when she was doing slow work with a litter, and I looked at Small eating with absolute single-minded commitment. What do you know about wolf bonds? I said. A pause. Not much, she said. Venholt didn't keep wolves. I know the basics, that they're meant to track the alpha's emotional states, that they're more sensitive to certain signals than people are. She was quiet for a moment. I know I've been making your wolves do strange things, and I don't know how. You haven't been making them do anything, I said. That's the thing. She looked at me. The old records for this hold, I said. The Vorith records. They describe a specific sign, when the pack's wolves choose before the alpha claims. Before the bond is named. She was still looking at me. It's meant to indicate, I said, and then stopped, because I was a man who did not generally struggle for words, and I was struggling for words. It indicates, I said, that the bond has already settled, that the wolves know before the alpha is willing to admit it. The pen was very quiet. Small had finished eating and was making a small, indignant sound that meant he wanted more. Senna did not look at him. She was looking at me with an expression I could not fully read, not fear, not calculation, something more careful than either. I've been here 4 days, she said. I know. You don't know me. I know some things, I said. I know you found a pup that wasn't yours in a snow-covered den site, and you carried it 11 miles to give it back. I know you traveled 4 years through the outer north alone after someone chose to dissolve a bond, and you did it without breaking into pieces. I know you've been in my hold for 4 days and 17 wolves have arranged themselves around you as if they've been waiting for you specifically. She was quiet. I'm not asking you for anything, I said. I'm not making a demand. You came here with nowhere to go, and what's happening with the wolves is happening without your consent or mine, and I stopped again. I looked at Mara, who was watching me with the particular quality she had when I was finally arriving at something she'd known for a week. I wanted you to know what the old records say, I said, so you could decide what to do with it. Senna looked down at Small for a moment. He had given up on more food and had arranged himself across her boot, which he had decided was his. What do you do with it? She said. I don't know yet, I said. I've been a king for 11 years and no one has warned me for this. A pause. I think I trust what my wolves know. I always have. I looked at her. I think I'd like to know you, not because of the wolves. Because you sat at the end of my table in a hold that wasn't yours and waited without making it anyone else's problem. And you talked to a pup too small to hear you through the night, so he didn't panic alone in the dark. And those are the kind of things a person does when they're worth knowing. She was looking at me with that careful expression. Then, slowly, something in it settled. I'd like to know you too, she said. I think. A small pause. I've been moving for 4 years and I keep moving partly because stopping was harder than going. This is the first place I've stopped and not wanted to start moving again the next morning. Is that the wolves? I said. She looked at Mara. Partly, she said, then quietly, not entirely. The first full month was not a recognition. It was a series of small things. She learned the hold's rhythms, the morning count, the noon report, the evening rounds. She was in the pens at dawn and stayed until Dara told her to go to supper, and Dara generally told her twice before she went. She was methodical in the way of someone who had learned that method was what kept difficult things from becoming disasters. She was not chatty, she talked when she had something to say, and when she didn't have anything to say, she was quiet in a way that was not uncomfortable. I had been a king for 11 years, and I had never been around a quiet that was not uncomfortable, because quiet in a king's company generally meant someone was deciding how to ask for something. She was not deciding how to ask for something, she was simply there. I started finding reasons to be in the Undercroft at odd hours. I told myself for 2 weeks that it was the runt. Small was doing well and required checking on. That was true. I also told myself, for the 2 weeks after that it was Mara, that Mara was aging and I was keeping a closer eye. That was also true. Vane gave me one look during the 3rd week, and had the wisdom not to say anything. She came to my study once in that first month. She knocked, the precise, 3-knock rap of someone who was not certain they were welcome, and had decided to knock properly rather than tentatively. I told her to come in. She had a question about the pack treaty from the Eastern Holds, and whether any of the packs had historical trade relationships with Venhold, because if they did she might know something useful about their pricing habits from her years there. It was a practical question. It had a practical answer. She stood at the edge of the study while I answered it, looking at the archive shelves in the way she looked at things she found interesting, and when I finished she said thank you and turned to go. I said you can stay, and then immediately thought about what that meant and added, the archive, the Vorith records, if you're interested. You're welcome to read them. She turned back, she looked at the shelves. I'd like that, she said. She came back that evening. She sat on the study's second chair, which had been a storage surface for the past 11 years and had never been used as a chair, and she read the Vorith records with the same concentration she brought to the pups, and I worked through the Eastern Treaty papers, and neither of us spoke for 2 hours. When she left she said, the wolves named 3 different alphas mates, over 300 years. 4, I said. There's a page missing from the 2nd volume. 4, she said. She stood in the study doorway for a moment. It's a very long record for something people say is unusual. My family has been here a long time, I said, and the bond doesn't always come. It came 4 times in 300 years, and 3 of those times, it was the wolves who named it first. She was quiet. Then, did the alphas always listen to the wolves? I looked at her. Eventually, I said. She made a sound that might have been a laugh, very brief, very quiet, and went out. I sat in my study for a long time after. It was the last day of the 2nd month that it became undeniable. Not for me, I had stopped arguing with myself at some point in the 2nd week, quietly, in the way of conceding a thing you were never going to win. The concession didn't require drama. It simply meant I'd stopped spending energy on the argument and started spending it on something else. But it became undeniable for the council, and for the hold on the last day of the 2nd month, because of what happened in the Eastern Yard. A wolf from the Draven pack, a southern pack, traveling through, their wolf out of temper from the road and the cold, and the unfamiliar scent of a strange hold, got past the yard gate when it was open for the grain delivery. It was a large male, half-trained, and it went immediately for the most vulnerable thing it could find, which was 3 of Mara's pups who had been brought out into the east yard for their first outdoor exercise. I was in the hall, I heard the commotion, I came out at a run. Senna was already in the yard. She had gotten between the Draven wolf and the pups, not dramatically, not throwing herself in front of it with the gesture of a hero, but with the practical positioning of someone who had looked at the situation and moved to where she needed to be. She was not making threatening gestures. She was standing between the wolf and the pups, and she was talking, the low voice she used in the pens, steady and without particular speed, and the wolf was not calm but stopping. It stopped. It stood and it looked at her, and it was still out of temper, still not settled, and I came into the yard with 3 of my wolves at my back and the Draven handlers coming through the gate behind them, and the crisis was over in 10 seconds. But for those 10 seconds, she had put herself between a half-drained foreign wolf and 3 pups that were not her responsibility, and she had talked it into pausing with her voice. Mara pushed past me to the pups. She assessed them one by one, nose to flank, and they were unharmed, because Senna had gotten there first. Senna looked at me across the yard. I looked back at her. Behind me I heard Vane say, very quietly to no one in particular, "Well." I went to her in the pens that evening. The 3rd time I had gone to her in the pens in the evening, but the first time I had gone with the particular quality of having decided something. She was with Small, who did not need feeding anymore but who treated her boot as his personal territory regardless. Mara was there. The full 17, as Vane had counted, were not, but there were 7 of them in and around the pen, arranged in the comfortable way of animals who have decided a place is theirs. "The eastern yard," I said. "The pups weren't hurt," she said. "Because of you." She looked at me. "The handlers were coming," she said. "The handlers were 40 seconds behind you," I said. "The wolf was not going to wait 40 seconds. She didn't answer this. "You have been in this hold for 2 months, I said. "You have been in the pens before dawn every morning and in the study reading the Vorith records on the evenings you're not in the pens, and you have been in this hold like someone who belongs in it, and I am aware that I said you could go north in spring, and I want you to know that I said that before I stopped. I was not a man who circled. I want to ask you to stay," I said. "Not as hold staff. I want to ask you to stay." The pens were quiet. Small was asleep on the boot. Senna looked at me for a long time. Not the careful look she'd had in the early days, something more open than that. The look of someone who had been waiting without quite knowing they were waiting and had now arrived. "The Vorith records say the bond is already settled," she said. "They do. Do you believe that?" I looked at Mara. Mara was looking at me with 11 years of patience and the absolute conviction of an animal who has known the right answer for 2 months and has been waiting for the alpha to catch up. "Yes," I said. Senna looked down at Small, then she looked back at me. "I've been moving for 4 years, she said. "I keep thinking when I stop it'll be because I found a reason, not because I was tired of moving. I didn't want to stop just to stop." A pause. "This is a reason." "Yes," I said. "Then I'll stay," she said. "Not for the spring past it." I had been a king for 11 years and I had learned to be measured with what I showed, because a king's face was always being read by someone, and what they read could be used. I was not measured then. I did not know what showed on my face, but it was not the face of a man being measured. She looked at it, and something in her face changed in answer. The council was assembled the next morning, and I told them. Dymath was the first to speak. He said, in the voice of a man who has been sitting with something for 2 months, "Good." Just that one word. He said it with 50 years behind it, and he folded his hands on the table, and that was his contribution to the proceedings. Vane said nothing. He was looking at the table. His expression was the one he wore when something had resolved correctly after he'd spent a long time being quietly concerned it wouldn't. The others asked the practical questions. Her pack, her history, the Venholt dissolution, whether there were complications. There weren't. I told them what I knew of her. I told them what I knew because I had been watching and listening for 2 months, and what I knew was enough. What the wolves knew was also enough, and I said this too, without apology, because in this hold the wolves had been trusted for 300 years and I was not going to stop trusting them now. There were no objections. Whatever arguments might have been made about a packless woman with no standing and no bond marks were made very difficult by the fact that Mara had walked the length of the great hall and lain at her feet, and everyone in the hall had seen it, and no one who had been in the hall that morning was inclined to argue with what Mara knew. Senna was brought in at 9th bell. She stood at the end of the table where she had sat for supper on her first night, and I stood at the head of it, and I told her what I was offering in the language the hold used for these things. A place, a name, a pact, a bond sworn before witness, and I asked her plainly if she would accept it. She said yes. She said it without performance and without excessive ceremony, the way she said things, and Dymath said good again, and Vane looked at the table for another moment and then looked up, and his expression was not measured at all. Mara was present. She had come in from the South Passage again, as if she'd done it 100 times, and she sat beside Senna through the whole of it with the air of someone whose administrative function was complete, and who was simply attending as a formality. I am writing this in the winter of the year after. The hold keeps the old records, the Vorith records, the 3 volumes and the one with the missing page, and I have added to them, as the alphas before me added to them, a short account of the bond, the signs, the wolves choosing, the date she came through the gate in the snow with a pup in a leather harness she'd made herself on the south bank of the Vorith River. Small is not small anymore. He is the largest of Mara's litter, by a considerable margin, which is a thing that happens sometimes with runts. They overcorrect. He has decided that the Undercroft is his specific domain, and that he has a personal and binding relationship with Senna's left boot. We have all made our peace with this. Mara is older. She moves more slowly than she did, and there are mornings when she does not come to the dawn count, and Dara says nothing about it, and I say nothing about it, because Mara has earned the right to decide when she comes and when she doesn't, and the younger wolves are learning the signals she gives, and the hold will be ready when it needs to be ready. I am not ready to think about it beyond that. Senna reads in the study most evenings. She has gone through the full archive twice now, the Vorith records and the 3 volumes of territorial history and the 2 ledgers of Pact Treaty records, and she has better recall of their contents than I do, which I find I have no problem with at all. She still talks to the pups in the low voice I can't hear from the doorway. I have stopped pretending I'm at the doorway for a different reason. Last week she found a fox kit in the eastern yard, under a grain cart, too young to be where it was. She brought it in without asking anyone. It is currently in a box in the hold keeper's pantry, which is the warmest room in the building at this time of year. Dara has said 3 things about this fox that are progressively less severe than the first. I expect by spring she will have named it. I asked Senna last week whether she still thought about going north. She thought about it for a moment genuinely. She was in the pens with the morning's routine, and she thought about it the way she thought about things she took seriously, and then she said, "No, I think I already got there. I have been a king for 12 years now, and I have added 1 year of knowing her to that, and I am not certain that I could tell you, at this point, which of the 2 things has changed me more thoroughly. The wolves know. They have always known. I have learned in this year to trust them faster than I used to see the thing they're indicating before I've spent 2 months deciding whether to look at it." Small is asleep on her boot. Mara is watching the pups with gray-muzzled patience. The north is cold, and the hold is warm, and she is here, which is the fact that makes all the other facts make sense. I did not go looking for her. She came to the gate with a pup that was not hers and a question she almost didn't ask. Mara walked the length of the great hall and made the council fall silent and lay down at her feet. I would have put her on the road. My wolves were wiser than I was. They have always been wiser than I was. That is the thing about trust, the real kind, the kind that has been tested and has held. It only goes one direction. You trust it, or you don't. You follow where the wolves lead, or you miss the whole of it. I am grateful every morning of this year that I followed.